Hello and welcome to this video tutorial where we are going to look at writing our first macro. So exciting stuff. This is where we're going to start writing one from scratch. And it's just going to be a simple example to begin with to get familiar with VBA grammar and how you can begin and lay out our macro, our code. So what we're going to look at doing is just writing a simple little macro that when we click a button we'll put today's date in cell B1 and it will increment the value in cell B2 by 1. So it should change 351 to 352, but whenever we click it, if I clicked it tomorrow, it would put in tomorrow's date as it would be, and then 353 if we had already changed it to 352, but incremented by 1. And then we might get it to display a quick little message at the end like we saw in one of our previous tutorials. So first thing is to get that Visual Basic editor, the VBE, open. And we can do that from the Developer tab and Visual Basic, or the keyboard shortcut of Alt and F11. So that will open our VBE. Open it pops Project Explorer on the left there, showing that I have a file open called First Macro. I've got 3 sheets in the workbook, but at the moment I do not have a module that I can use to store my code in. So I'm going to insert one. I'm going to go to the Insert menu and Module. Make sure before I do that I am somewhere within the project that you want. You may only have one project or one file there. If not, make sure you're somewhere within that hierarchy so that when you do insert the module, it appears within there. And you'll get a modules folder with a minus sign to collapse and plus to expand that list, and one module with the window immediately opened. Remember from earlier that we know that's our module 1 window because along the top it says first macro.xlsx module 1 code. So I know the project and object that I'm in. Now we can see in the properties window just below the Project Explorer that I can rename that module if I want. So I might call it first macro. Not a legal object name. What have we done? No spaces. Remember, within macro names, and as we go through this course, obviously module names, also things like variables, and no spaces in the names that you provide. If you see that it's asking you for a caption or a label, you can generally put names in that. That's something that's visible, but not in the actual name. So a bit of a recap there. Let's change that to first macro with an underscore. Is it happy with that one? It is. And you can see it's renamed within the Project Explorer. Okay, the macro itself. Now a macro in VBA is known as a sub-procedure or subroutine. This is the proper term for it. We can call it a macro still, it's interchangeable, that name. But it's known as a subroutine or sub-procedure. And the reason for that is because we're going to start with the word sub. Space and then the name of this macro. Let's say I'm going to call it new ID. I'm clearly making this stuff up. I'm going to call it new ID. No spaces, so I've got an underscore there separating them. Another common approach is one known as camel casing, where we can join our words together using capitals to separate the changing words. I'm going to keep that now I've got it, and I'm going to press enter. So enter as usual would put you onto a new line. What it also does is put these parentheses on the end. Now we didn't have to write them, but your macros or your sub-procedures should always have them brackets at the end. At some point throughout this course we may well be using them. We'll be using it to pass arguments, variables and stuff. But for now, we can just rely on the fact that Excel is going to pull it in for us. Also capitalizes the S of sub. Don't know if you noticed, but I wrote that all in lowercase for speed purposes. Turns it blue to show it's a reserved keyword. It knows what that word is. You're also not allowed to use that word as a name of a macro or module or variable. It also puts end sub in, so I've got a kind of framework here for my macro. All my code would go in the middle of them 2 lines that they've created. Now it's not necessary, but a very good idea for me to press enter a couple of times to get some white space in there, and then to maybe move into the middle line and use my tab key to indent. Function wise, it is not necessary to do that stuff, but universal practice. Any macro you come across via Google or reading the book will be using this way of laying out their code. It brings clarity to it, so it's much easier for you or your colleagues to read now or at a later date. Yeah, that's what it's all about. It's about the clarity of it. And we'll see this practice, especially the indentation of code and these extra spaces, just to, there is some kind of universal way of working here, which we'll stick to as much as we can, because it's what you're going to see out there when you're doing it for real. But also you can add your personal touch on this. What makes sense to you? What's a logical way of displaying this code to make it as easy to read and understandable as you can? Remember, you might be coming back to this in 2 years' time and you'll forget all about what you did and you need to get up to speed quickly. Okay, now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the date in cell B1. So I've got this Visual Basic editor open. Remember that I can always restore this if I want to, and I can move it and see my spreadsheet in the background. They're 2 separate windows, these. And I can see that date is cell B1, ID is B2. So I'm going to write range. I've got my caps lock on there, it would seem. Let's try that again, range, but it matters that much. It would have changed it for me. Open in parentheses, then opening double inverted commas, opening speech marks. I'm going to write B1, closing speech marks, closing parentheses. So what I'm using here is what's known as an object called range, and it is one of many ways that you can select a cell within your code. It's probably the most common way. It's the way that you'll see when you're recording macros that it goes for. It's an absolute reference to that cell B1. It has to be B1. Now I'm going to put a full stop after that, or a kind of period, and I'll get this drop down list of what are known as properties and methods. Things I can do or information I can see about that cell. So there's a large list here. All the ones with an icon showing a kind of piece of paper with a finger pointing to it is known as a property. So it's a bit of information I can view or change about this cell, such as its address, which may seem silly here because it's B1 and I've just written that, but such as its address, or what else have we got in here that's good? Throw something up for me, come on. The entire row, what row is it in? To select it there, what's its height, does it have a formula, this kind of stuff, information about it. All the ones with this kind of flying rubber are known as methods, and a method is an action. So we can see here, apply an advanced filter, add a comment to it, calculate it, check the spelling of it, actions you can perform on it. So properties and methods. This drop down list can really help you out at times. It doesn't matter how much you do this and how used to it you get, you will forget to spell things or the exact name of something. It can jog your memory. What I'm going to go for here is I'm going to put value, which I can see is a property, what information is inside that cell. And then I'm going to follow that with an equals. Equals is known as the assignment operator within VBA. So I'm going to assign something to the value of B1. And what I'm going to write is I'm going to write date. Now date is an inbuilt VBA function that will capture today's date from your computer's clock. Now you may know from your own experience or through going through our superhero course that in Excel normally there's a function called today that will put in today's date. For some reason in VBA it is called date, not today. Same job, different name. And you see that in a few other areas as well. For example, VBA has a function called isNumeric, which is the same as an Excel function called isNumber. They're very similar but different. But there's an inbuilt VBA function to put the date in there. Okay, I'm going to press enter to move to the next line. VBA is a procedural language. Every command, every line of code has to have its own line. I can't begin writing the next code after it. It has to go in its own line. And the next line is going to increment the ID in cell B2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a copy of the line I've already got. Copy and paste is an essential programming skill. Just copy and paste however you feel comfortable to do so. I'm just going to change the 1 to a 2 and then change the date to what I need. So copy and pasting will always save you time and improve your accuracy of your code. Definitely an essential programming skill. Now this time, once again, I'm assigning something to cell B2. This time I want to increment the current value by 1. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to copy that line of code again over date. And after it, put +1. So what I'm doing is some area where it's different in VBA to what we would have done normally is that the right hand side contains the calculation. So whatever value is currently in B2 +1, and then that is assigned to B2. So it looks like we're duplicating things, we're writing this twice, and you don't normally do that when you write a calculation write a formula in Excel normally. But bear in mind that equals in VBA is the assignment operator. It's a little bit different to what it is normally. So we formula on the right, or function, and then assign to what's on the left. So what we've done so far is we've seen an inbuilt VBA function, we've performed a formula, and we've been referencing cells. Not a bad start to our macro, writing our talents, hey? Next up, we should look at inserting a comment. So I'm just going to move that down one more space and put it on the line above. We can add comments on its own line, on the end of a line, however we want. And these comments can be used for different reasons, but essentially it's a line of text that does not run. So you can use it mainly to leave notes for yourself, to leave comments, explaining sections of code. So if you did return to this in 2 years' time, you can read that and know what each section means rather than trying to interpret it all over again. There are also techniques to use it to kind of prevent lines of code from running when you're kind of troubleshooting errors. There are other reasons to add this in. But to add a comment in, all we do is we start with an apostrophe. And then we write our line of code. So I might put enter today's date and increment ID. And trying to explain what the next few lines of code do, so in the future when I come back to it, I don't have to interpret this. Now these are easy lines of code, so maybe a bit pointless here, and there's no reason to overdo your commenting. That doesn't make sense and it's counterproductive. As I click off that, we notice that the line goes green. Comments always green. It says a line of code that does not run. It's only there for notes for yourself. It's a notes area. Now what we've done so far when we assign these two values, just to add a little bit more information to that, we're getting familiar with VBA grammar or VBA syntax and kind of its terminology. And you'll notice that when we use VBA, we use what's known as the object model. And we'll be doing this throughout the course, using things known as collections and objects and this other terminology that may seem a little bit alien at first. But VBA is all about learning the object model, and fortunately you know a lot of that already because you're an advanced Excel user. You already know a lot of things you can do in Excel, things like print area, pivot table, charts, font formatting, protection, and you may already know this stuff at different levels, so you kind of know where to find it and you've got a bit of understanding. It's not completely new, this. Now unfortunately it's not that straightforward. They will use sometimes different terms and it might catch you out a little bit, but we've got a massive head start on it. And when we use this object model, what I mean is the lines of code we write, we always write the name of an object like range, worksheets, pivot tables, charts, something like this, and then we put a full stop and we follow it with either a property or a method. So we perform, we assign information to it to a property, or we tell it to do something via a method. And this is a common theme we'll see, affecting a property or a method. It's always object dot property or method. And here we're assigning, or if there's a method, we might have to provide additional information. For example, if I press enter a couple of times, in my mind I'm just using a blank bit of line there, blank bit of white space, just to break these into two different sections to make it easier to read. And I'm going to write MSG box, something we saw in a previous video. This is an inbuilt VBA function. Now after typing that, when I press my space bar, I get this yellow box pop up. And the great thing about this, backing up what I said a moment ago, is the similarities to what you already know. And especially if you took my superhero course, we would have done a lot of different functions, over 30 different functions we would have done. And we would have spoken and seen how they're all written the same way. They have their odd little quirks at times. And this is the exact same syntax. Notice how after MSG box, they ask you to put brackets in. And then they show different arguments, different information, separated by a comma. If information is optional, it is wrapped within these square brackets. So it's saying, look, at the moment you're on one called prompt. This is mandatory. Next up is buttons, then title, then help file, then context. All four of them are optional. You don't need them unless you want them. Now you may not know what they mean. You may look at context and think, well, what does that do? How do I use it? And we can always use Google or a book we may have at home to help back us up as a reference there. But the key skill is we know how to use it. We're getting used to terminology and VBA grammar. We know we use arguments by separating them with a comma, and this is how we get going with using it. In this example, we just want to display a simple prompt. If I want to display text, we should also know from our standard Excel skills that we wrap text within speech marks, or these double inverted commas. So I can just write the ID has been where we're going, updated. Take a bow. So I've got a silly message in there. This is mainly for the purpose of showing you this this tooltip popping up, helping you, and the similarity to functions as we begin to move our way through the day. As I click off again, VBA run what they call a syntax check, and they're tidying it up putting spaces in, capitalising letters, checking it makes sense, we haven't made a typo or something. But I've got another message box in there now, inbuilt VBA function. I could add a comment, a very pointless thing to do really in this example, but just to cement what we spoke a moment ago, message box to chat with user. There are loads of powerful ways to use a message box. They will be coming up again and again in this course, to provide information to the user, to ask them questions and interact with them. Absolutely incredible tool. It's definitely up there with something you're going to see an awful lot in your VBA career. But here we are writing our first macro. 3 jobs is what it does, comments to lay it out, and it's neat and tidy and easy to read. And we've got a good head start here on what's known as the object model. Last thing that's left for me to do is to look at running this macro. Now there are loads of ways of doing that. The way I'm going to demonstrate to start with is this green arrow up on our toolbar known as Run Sub User Form. Mentions that F5 is the keyboard shortcut. We could use that to run this macro. But that is one way you can run your macros to test that they're working on your sample file. If I press that now, that code runs. I can see it's incremented 351 to 352. Hashes, must be a date in there, but it's not quite big enough, that column. And my message box saying I can take a bow. I'll click OK to that and I can see it's working. Let me resize that cell. And indeed, let me delete the contents of that cell. Alt and F11 to bring back my editor. So that's one way that we can run this code. Let's recap in another way we've already seen. I'm going to click outside of there. And I'm going to go to the View tab and the Macros button. A longer way of doing things, so when you're up and running, I can't see you doing it this way. But I wanted to go this way to show you that our macro is in there. So we've seen recording macros and accessing it from this dialog box. Now we've gone into the editor and written one with our own code from scratch, but it's still existing here as a macro. Macro, sub procedure, same thing. I can click run and it will run that code. So now it's gone to 353. It's the same date, so the date goes in as the same message box. You can see our macro running on that code and doing a job when required each time. All we'd need is a logical way of running it now with a kind of button on our toolbar or our sheet. That's something we've already covered, so we won't worry about that for now. We'll get on and start talking about some more VBA topics.